Thanks so much everyone for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine. You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community. This ecosystem. Thanks so much everyone for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine. Our goal is to make it easy for practitioners.
Hello everyone and welcome. We had two things playing at the same time. I'm going to start again and we'll just start again in a minute. All right, let's start again right with this.
Please.
Thanks so much everyone for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine. You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community. This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Masco.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Functional Forum. Great to have you here from all across the world. It's going to be a great forum. Please, no, it's too much. I'm just sitting at home. What are you guys doing? No, I'm just sitting at home. I'm not working that hard. Thank you so much. Great to be here with you all. Super excited to be here for this week in medicine. And yeah, super excited to be here with you all right now. All right, that's enough. All right, keep quiet. Thank you. All right, thanks. How's it going? James is here. I am live from my house in Sacramento, California. This is the first time that we're doing the Functional Forum kind of live, like I'm here live and you're here wherever you are watching. Hopefully some of you are watching live. We do have meetup groups going on around the world and I'm super excited. Actually, next week, I'm going to be speaking at the Fort Collins meetup group, at the Rotterdam in the Netherlands meetup group. Last week, I was with the St. Louis meetup group. And so it's great to have an opportunity to dive in to some of these meetups and hang out with them on Zoom. So if you are interested in starting a meetup or going to a meetup, you can go to meetup.functionalforum.com. We have got some really exciting stuff coming in the future with the future of the Functional Forum. So watch this space. I'm super excited about where we're going to be taking things and really creating serious community around the world. We've had so much great feedback of how valuable, you know, it is for practitioners to be able to have that much community. And that was before this whole thing happened, right? And so what are we going to do in the future? You know, I'm sure if you're like me, you're missing other people. You want to give people a hug. You want to high five with other practitioners. You want to share what's going on for you in your practice. So we're going to be doing all of that and more. Just as a preview, the next Functional Forum is 4 weeks tonight, June the 1st. And it's going to be a Institute for Functional Medicine annual international conference pre-party. So we've done the pre-party at the IFM AIC for the last 4 years. And even though the whole event is virtual and is running, I think, the 11th and 12th of June, the next Functional Forum is going to be the pre-party. We're going to have some snippets of some incredible conversations with people like Dr. Jeffrey Bland, Joe Pizzorno, Dr. Tironi Lodog. We're going to hear from Dr. Robin Berzin, Cheng Ron, Dr. Jeffrey Glad. We're bringing out all of the big guns for the IFM AIC pre-party. We're going to be talking about the transformation of medicine towards functional medicine being the standard of care and what that's going to take. So I hope you can mark your calendars for that. June 1st, similar kind of format to this. We'll be live with some clips coming in. All right, so let's get on with what we're going to talk about here tonight. So for the first time since February, and by the way, This year being the year of resilience, can we just have a moment to talk about how prescient that was, right? The year of resilience. What do we need more than anything right now? We need individual resilience. We need family resilience. We need community resilience. We need national resilience. We need international resilience. And so the year of resilience, what do? We got to put the stressor on. And what could have been a bigger stressor than COVID-19? So I heard this great phrase the other day that said, you know, we're all different boats weathering the same storm. And so wherever you are in the world, you know, whatever your situation is, we're here with you. And thank you very much for tuning in. We know that you've got a lot of other stuff that you could be doing with your time. So thanks for being here. So tonight we've got a great show. We're going to feature some incredible presentations. Tonight's show is on mitochondrial medicine. I am live. I am going to be checking Twitter for #FunctionalForum during the show, and I'll be answering questions throughout the show and at the end of the show. So get on Twitter, use #FunctionalForum. Tonight, we're going to be talking about mitochondrial medicine. So last October, we went to a conference on mitochondrial medicine that was put on by George Washington, and we got some of the footage from that, and we've just taken some of the best bits today. So to kick us off is Dr. Shilpa Saxena. Most of you guys know her, one of the best loved educators in functional medicine. And she's talking about the stress-heart energy connection. This is really going to lay a foundation for what mitochondrial medicine is. A bit later, we'll hear from Dr. Andrew Heyman and Dr. Christopher Mote. But let's kick it off with Dr. Shilpa Saxena. Enjoy.
I like to do my lectures in a style that teaches you how to teach patients. Okay, so there's definitely some very great academic research, physiology, biochemistry, pathophys that you got, but here's the deal. If you get all that information and you cannot articulate and communicate the concepts to your patients in a way that then causes behavior change, then the information, although so important, is lost in you, if you will. Like you're the rate limiting funnel step block, if you will. So when I teach, I don't mean to insult you to say like, let me make sure you know that it goes A, B, C. It is not that. It's hopefully to help you get a language about how to teach this to a patient. Does that make sense? And in the process, you're also getting the language about how I can understand it, like simply if it's a new concept to you. So the first thing to note is that, hey, everybody is interested in nutrition. Patients, it's important that you do get a well-balanced diet. These macronutrients are really important because they contribute to the energy, what we call ATP, that's available in your body. And there are many cycles and things that occur to take those macronutrients or food items that you're eating, and magic happens. I do not go through the Krebs cycle with most of my patients. And actually, we're going to take a little tangent in a second and talk about certain patient personas so that you get a sense of how to talk to certain types of functional medicine, integrative medicine patients. So I say, hey, you know, there's this magical stuff that happens and it requires quite a bit of nutrients and good structure. So this is my artistic version of the cristae and mitochondria. Structure supports function. So we want to take care of how our mitochondria are nourished and how they're sustained so that they can keep doing their job. And that these mitochondria are your energy producing factories. And interestingly, in your body, the content of mitochondria varies. Obviously, my lecture being about cardiometabolic disease, and if somebody is coming to see me for that particular issue or concern, I'm gonna, of course, glorify, guess what? Your heart needs a lot of energy. That's why there's so many of these energy producing factories in those cells. So 5,000 of them in a cardiac cell. And that it's so important that 50% of a myocardial cell's cytoplasm is filled with mitochondria. Now, are you getting how this is a very simplistic way for a patient to understand the importance of mitochondria and heart health? That's really the thing I'm trying to connect the patient to, because they have to have some buy-in, right? They're not going to attach to mitochondria by itself, but they need to have it attached to what they're coming in for. So again, I say, listen, your heart cells use this nutrition up, and we've got to replace it almost every 10 seconds. That's why it's really important that you have all those ingredients in that cycle. And so, hey, different people have different needs or amounts of nutrition that they have, and then we've got to look at how much you're actually feeding the need. You know, are you adequately nourishing these structures, these energy-producing factories? Now, just as a research aside, most of you might already know or intuitively figure out that something like a congestive heart failure patient would benefit from taking a mitochondrial health slant to your care plan. And as Dr. Naviaux said, it's not just about energy, but there are definite cardiac conditions that when energy, mitochondrial health is improved, many times by just giving the necessary micronutrients, you'll see improvement in heart function, ejection fraction, or you can actually delay progression of the heart failure. And this is in conventional literature, by the way. I always think it's, you know, this is American Heart Association 2018. So this is a standard of care to understand this. So these are some of the common micronutrient deficiencies. I will always tell people, like, listen, as much as we can get this from food, great, but sometimes we might need to use supplements in the short term. And I always, you know, you can show them a fancy picture and say, listen, this is the list. I do not want you to go to a health food store and now start to one by one find a bottle of each one of these things. If you don't say that, that might be what they think is the next logical step if you gave this list, right? But just say, listen, these are not coming out of nowhere. That's coming from that cycle where the magic happens and also other things in your body that generate this energy. I also make it a point, we don't only take care of people for secondary prevention or with heart failure, heart attack, stroke. We're taking care of majority patients who are at risk for their first event. So important to also note, just for you from a prevention side, that preserving and protecting mitochondrial function earlier in life is important for cardiometabolic disease prevention. Not just for structure, like for atherosclerosis and reperfusion, ischemia reperfusion injury, but also for risk factors like blood pressure, diabetes, and so on. And cholesterol, high cholesterol, it's not listed here. So when you see a patient with cardiometabolic risk factors, please insert mitochondrial dysfunction as one of the things that you might consider. It wasn't inherently obvious to me. In fact, I am going to out myself here and say that when I studied functional medicine, I loved learning about the gut. I loved learning about detox. I loved learning about hormones. I loved learning about mind-body, and I was scared of mitochondria. Is there anybody who's scared of mitochondria? Nobody's gonna out themselves, huh? Dr. Naviaux, thank you. So I was scared of mitochondria, and it's like those cycles and all those micronutrients and electrons and all that scared me, and I avoided it for years, quite honestly. So I would tell you you're not alone if it does scare you, but again, it's just to kind of keep it simple. That's the way we can approach anything that scares us. So what to do when things go awry? Number one, just first think of repleting micronutrients that might be deficient in their diet, right? Like we got to put back in what the body needs. This is obvious. Now I'm going to give you some ideas on how I do it here in a second. And generally I just pull from the list here. I start over here. And then I also will bring in some phytochemicals as necessary. Let me tell you, I do not give individual bottles. I look for blends. I love these companies out here because they do a lot of the work for me to put the proper blends together so that things are available in powders and capsules, and people don't have to have so many, like what's called capsule fatigue on the body, because we're trying to improve their guts, and then you give them 50 capsules. That's not really a great plan if you can avoid it. I also am big on communicating with patients the buy one, get one free special or buy one, get two free special. So let's say I have an insulin resistant patient who might have some dysbiosis. I might want to bring some berberine in because I'll get a buy one, get one free on that. Or if I have someone who really suffers from allergies, I might get a supplement blend that has some quercetin and some overlap for what will help with mitochondria. Just like I believe Tom Williams had said, many things that help one part, like the microbiome, will also seem to help the mitochondria because they tend to have the same insults that are bothering, whether it's the mitochondria, the microbiome, et cetera. So I always try to message to the patient, hey, listen, why don't we do this because you get the benefit of your brain, your heart, and your microbiome. That really engages someone to see the value in taking on a dietary supplement. This is another extended list. Again, just giving you doses for reference. I'm not going to read to you, but again, look for buy one, get one specials and articulate that to the patient whenever possible. Now I'm going to talk about how to speak this. Capsule fatigue. I think maybe because I get capsule fatigue that I just project that onto my patients. I assume you must have it as well too. How many of you do not love taking more than 5 capsules a day? Yeah, most of us, right? I have a group of patients, and I might say that it's me as well, that the more capsules I take, I almost feel like I'm sick. I'm just taking green medicine versus, pharmaceutical medicine, but it still gives this notion that I'm sick. So I like to not have to look at a bunch of capsules as a reminder. All right, now this is a concept. Now, people need certain things. Sid Baker, who is kind of one of the forefathers of functional medicine thinking, said that when you're looking at a system that seems to not function optimally, there are things that it needs, and then there are things that are in it that need to be removed or get out of the picture. So in terms of need versus avoid, one of the things I notice about the public is that they pick one or the other. Like they'll do an elimination diet, let's say, and they'll say, I don't feel better. And that's because they've only done the avoid part, but they haven't replaced the need portion. Are you with me on that? I don't know who's credited with TAC theory, but TAC theory in functional medicine is a great lesson for patients as well too. If you're sitting on 10 TACs and you remove 2, do you feel 20% better? No. So when a patient has 10 TACs, and I say it just like this, let's say you have 10 TACs in your bottom, because first of all, that gets them laughing. Their parasympathetic nervous system activates, and now they're more likely to hear what you're saying, right? Like laughter is good medicine, it's good connection. So I say you've got 10 TACs in your bottom. And they're like, oh, that's funny, she said bottom. I might use some French depending on the patient. Sometimes I have some New Yorkers who really enjoy me throwing a little bit of a curse word in. Anyway. So I say you have 10 TACs in your bottom. Now, because they'll have come to say like, I eliminated gluten and it didn't do any difference, it didn't make a single bit of difference. And everybody tells me that I have to remove gluten. I'm like, okay, well you removed 1 TAC. Now, you just haven't removed the other, like you have to remove another 6 or 7 at the same time to actually get pain relief from sitting on so many TACs. You're only removing 1. Obviously it helped, it's just that there's so many others in your butt that you can't tell. So use TAC theory as a way of explaining why you can't always just do single variable changes with diet, exercise, mind, body. Sometimes I feel like doing a micronutrient blend with X amount of phytochemicals in a functional food tries to remove a lot of TACs at one time, because as you likely know, if you don't get a good response for the patient on some of your first care plans, they generally are like, I don't know about this functional medicine thing or this doctor, I don't know what they're talking about. You really have to get your credibility going. I suggest you try to remove as many TACs as possible and in a way that doesn't break them. So again, that's why I like these blends. So remember that we've got to feed, we've got to replete, and then we want to also look out for things that they have to avoid. So this is something that's already been talked about. We know that there is a certain healthy output of reactive oxygen species that the mitochondria has and a certain amount of leakage. However, if you have too much, I'll call it the Goldilocks principle for patients. Like, too little of something is no good. You want a little bit of stress in the body. You don't want a lot of stress. You want a little bit of oxidative stress. You don't want a lot of oxidative stress. And you want the right amount of fat, sugar, protein, and I don't want to say the right amount of damaged DNA, but there's healthy amounts. And I explain to patients, oxidative stress is not all bad, but there's a certain amount where we're going to start oxidizing the macronutrients that you're eating. And I say if you have too much of this oxidative stress, which is many times linked to inflammation, so I call inflammation fire, and I call oxidative stress smoke. So I say if you're in a burning house, what are the two ways that you can generally get hurt? Number one is from the fire, and the other one is from the smoke, and they're completely different mechanisms. And so that becomes evident that, see, what oxidative stress is the smoke, and we have to do this antioxidant strategy to help you with the smoke part of this inflammation-based issue. And then we have things that are anti-fire, which are your anti-inflammatory. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't, but I help them understand that it's the smoke that ages you, and it burns your fats and burns your carbohydrates, and that's what makes them less usable and damaging to your body. So we talk a lot about caloric overload. Again, we use the Goldilocks principle in order to describe getting the right amount of calories. How many of you are using bioimpedance analysis to some of you are using it, maybe 25% of you. So, trying to figure out how much calories to allot for a patient. When I did a BIA for the first time, I was what you would call skinny fat. Skinny fat, 30% body fat, although if you looked at me, nobody would say that I had a weight issue because I had a normal BMI. I have that typical Asian Indian lean looking legs, which were, now I know, were sarcopenic. And here I was like, look at me, thin, and visceral adiposity here. I'm like, oh, that's just my kids, you come up with the excuses you need. But I was 30% body fat, and because I was sarcopenic, my total calorie amount allowable was 950 calories. 950 calories? That's illegal. So, and I like to eat, so that's why I'm a big fan of exercise, because it allows me to eat more. So when we look at caloric overload, make sure you tailor it to the patient. You can sometimes do it like a visual pattern if you need to, like small, medium, large, if you will, and kind of stick with 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 if you want to do it in a very simple way. But if you can get access to a BIA, actually calculate basal metabolic rate and kind of work formulas to help patients. You might have some patients who really like that data, like they like to be tested, and they like to hook me up, tell me what's wrong with me. So BIAs are great for that. So use that to be able to understand caloric overload and get your formulas for calories better. Very much about quality, to use the healthier carbs, healthier fats, and making sure you have a whole bunch of phytonutrients so you can get these micronutrient deficiencies as much replenished from food as possible. Right? I love this quote. To a significant degree, we are an overfed and undernourished nation, digging an early grave with our teeth and lacking the energy that could be ours because we overindulge in junk food. Digging an early grave with our teeth. Is that a visual or what? And I find that it's interesting that he has that energy as a part of it, right? And we're overfed and undernourished. I mean, what is the reason that, it's not the only reason, but one of the main purposes of food is to create energy. And it's just interesting that as a species, we are feeding ourselves, but we're not actually energizing ourselves with our new dietary habits.
All right, what a great session that was from
I like to do my
Saxena. I think that was really valuable information. I love all the stuff on capsule fatigue. I think that's a really relevant topic right now. I think also, you know, some of the things that she was saying there about the TAC theory of functional medicine, some great educational tools, and really a great starting point for, you know, for education. You know, Shilpa is the creator, obviously, of the group visit toolkits. I had heard Shilpa speak actually in 2013 before the Heal Thy Practice, before the Functional Forum ever started, at a conference called Heal Thy Practice, and you know, it's been a pretty big inspiration for me over the years. But I would say that you know, as well as the group visit toolkits, she's created these clinical implementation resources kits, which are available through the Lifestyle Matrix Resource Center, who are the main sponsor of the Functional Forum. And we partnered with LMRC just because they have all the group visit toolkits, and also they have all of these other resources that make it super easy for you to educate. So in this SOS stress recovery program, you know, you've got clinical implementation guides, there's in-practice guides, there's 100 brochures that make it easy for people to communicate. We've got these questionnaires, like all the things that it takes a lot of practitioners a lot of time to organize are completely available there. And there's also a new online learning portal. So you can go and expand your knowledge. You can check out the SOS stress recovery program in your practice. And we got proven strategies and templates to market this program. On the webinar we did a few weeks ago, I shared that I feel like, you know, stress programs might be, you know, a really good seller for you right now, wherever you are running your practice, because the stress of dealing with things at home or work or money or otherwise, you know, could be a big deal for patients in your community. And so having something really solid to offer them is a great starting point. So thanks, Dr. Saxena, for that great clip. I've had a few things come in at #FunctionalForum, so keep the questions coming in. We will go to our next clip. So, you know, that is a great foundation, right? We've got to get the nutrition right. I think some great ways of educating patients. Now we're going to get into some like deep functional medicine. And Dr. Andrew Heyman at this event, he talked about lipids and mitochondrial inflammation. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper into really understanding what's going on at inside the cell. Check out Dr. Andrew Heyman.
Let's talk about lipids a little bit. So we have this outer phospholipid bilayer, the mitochondrial matrix, and then there's the inner membrane. So the outer membrane has a variety of major components, the most important being phosphatidylcholine. It turns out the inner cell membrane has higher amounts of phosphatidylethanolamine, phosphatidylinositol. These might not be lipids that you're used to thinking about, but in the context of a mitochondrial discussion, it is unavoidable. And so we do a fair amount of lipid replacement. The inner membrane varies from the outer membrane. They sort of have different structures and functions. The phosphatidylethanolamin, the phosphatidylinositol, you can actually get in addition to phosphatidylcholine. And the concentration of PE, for example, is slightly higher in the inner membrane compared to the outer membrane, which is opposite for phosphatidylinositol. And one of the biggest differences is the greater concentration of cardiolipin that is found in the inner membrane in particular. And so we measure all of this in our practice. We're looking for evidence of changes in the structure of these lipids. Now again, in the early phases of the cell stress response, this is adaptive, but over time, it's likely maladaptive. And so phosphatidylcholine in particular, you probably remember something about this in medical school. It has a hydrophilic and hydrophobic component, and it's really important to not only act as a barrier from the outside and inside of the cell, but we have receptors that are embedded in it. It is important for communication, it's important for stimulating the immune response, and it's required in all eukaryotes for structural integrity, and it's a major component of bile, long surfactant, and lipoproteins. And it's imported from other cellular sites. PE is the second most abundant phospholipid in the mitochondrial membrane, comprising about 30% of the total phospholipid mass. And PE is a crucial component necessary for maintenance of mitochondrial morphology. Been shown to play a vital role in oxidative phosphorylation and process that's required for mitochondrial ATP. So here's just a nice image of the double lipid bilayer of the phospholipids. And we see a variety of abnormalities. So, I pulled this from Dr. Naviaux's work. We just know that when we're in that cell danger activity, the cell starts to produce abnormal lipids. And again, while that might be adaptive at some point, it's likely maladaptive over time. I've become convinced of that, certainly because when we do phospholipid therapy, we do see individuals improve. Now, remember, we measure all of this. We detect to see whether or not these changes have accrued, and then we remeasure with therapy over time to ensure that there's restoration of normal lipid content. So this process then of these lipid abnormalities that begin to appear under inflammatory states with respect to creating rigidity of the membrane, I think is a critical and important topic. Remember what he said yesterday is that the more rigid the cell membrane, the more efflux of ATP that occurs. So there's significant loss. So what's one way to potentially stop some of that is by beginning to replace lipids. And I wonder, and again, I wish I had some other measurement tools available to me, but it would be interesting to see at some point using lipid therapy, do we see in some sense, beginning restoration of, ATP so that there isn't as much of that warning sign that's being produced. We begin to see in its place these very long chain fatty acids, renegade fats, odd saturated fats, trans fats, ceramides. They all begin to appear as a result of this inflammatory process. And you can begin to categorize them and measure their levels to say whether or not they're present and they're a problem. We know that in some ways organisms like Lyme have themselves adapted to these lipid changes. In fact, use some of these very long chain fats as an energy substrate. So they've learned that our eukaryotic cells do this in defense, and they say, perfect, it's a feeding ground for us. These bugs can be really smart, and this is just one example of why it's so important to understand this concept, and why not use a therapy to interfere with the energy source for Lyme by replacing these very long chain fats with the more fluid phospholipids. These are all a result of this sort of epigenetic insult, and it changes cell metabolism, it changes mitochondrial activity, that all these exposures, whether it's mold or Lyme or whatever is stressing the cell, it ends up creating these very long chain fatty acids and lipid rafts and these distorted phospholipids, and they have this direct incorporation into the membrane. And it's all sort of ultimately a long-term disaster, I think, for the cell. If these are concepts or topics that you really haven't been exposed to, there's a whole body of literature on it. And we know a lot of the pathways that are generated as a result of the lipid-related changes that occur in the mitochondria. I mean, this literature goes back well over a decade. And as we see changes in the mitochondrial morphology, a lot of that is being driven by the structural alterations that are induced by the presence of these phospholipids. And if you notice, there's a growing list of, what are the threats to the mitochondria? I mean, just about anything you can think of, whether it's even emotional stress or toxins, infections, exposures, whatever it might be, including some of the things we normally think about, nutrient deficiencies, aging in general. And Dr. Naviaux began his talk with essentially xenobiotics. So we live in a soup that is constantly threatening us and whittling away at our resiliency. And at some point, the shift occurs. And the question is, do we have ways of measuring that shift and dealing with it? And lipids, I think, are a good way to do that. So here's some results. Trans isomers, very long chain fats, renegade fats, saturated odd fats, all elevated in this patient, all having to be managed. So we, again, do very aggressive lipid therapy. And then the question is there data for this? There is data for this. So there's a variety of clinical studies that have looked at phospholipid replacement in the setting of fatiguing illnesses, and sure enough, we see clinical improvement just by giving phospholipids back to the patient. Now, I would tell you, take a step back from this to say this is one of many changes that the mitochondria is inducing. Don't forget inflammation. Don't forget coagulation. Don't forget hypometabolism. Don't forget the pro-oxidative state, right? Don't forget. So the idea is, you know, where do we start targeting? And is there any evidence for these sort of interventions? And the answer is, yeah, there is some evidence. So what about butyrate? So butyrate 2, we find helps to turn off inflammation. It actually acts as a reservoir for resolvins, and it beta oxidizes these very long chain fats. So it actually helps the cell membrane burn off those fats. That's how we serve to get rid of the presence of these abnormal lipids. So, you know, there's a variety of studies on butyrate. Interestingly, I think butyrate is probably a under-recognized therapeutic option for us. The problem is it smells like stinky cheese, and patients don't like to take it orally. But I find that it actually works really well, and it inhibits the histone deacetylases. It helps it turn off VEGF. It turns off IL-6. It turns off NF-kappa B. So it does a lot of good for our patients, and I find that over time, with good butyrate therapy, it can be helpful. Now, the problem with butyrate is if they have a significant dysbiosis, they can get, they don't really benefit from oral butyrate. In our practice, we even give it IV as well. So butyrate enhances mitochondrial function during oxidative stress in cell lines from boys with autism. So, you know, there's some interesting studies in the literature on how butyrate affects inflammatory and oxidative stress pathways. So for our lipid therapy, we do a combination of oral phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylnositol, and phosphatidylethanolamine to repair the outer and inner cell membranes of the mitochondria, basically 1.8 to 2 grams twice a day. We will do omega-3s and 6s depending on the results of their tests. We definitely add in some resolvins to improve membrane fluidity, shift macrophages and microglia back from M1 to M2. We'll also do butyrate for beta oxidation of the abnormal and long chain fats to burn off from the membrane. And then we'll use wheat germ oil or other structural lipids like polycosanol or octacosanol to help with rebuilding of the myelin. So, you know, early in the process, we start dealing with lipids.
Very interesting information there from Dr. Andrew Heyman. He's running one of the most advanced functional medicine clinics in the country. And, you know, that talk, and, you know, if you pair today's information with last week's information, you see that what we're really doing is taking you through a lot of the good information that came, you know, all on this topic, which the whole topic of this conference was mitochondrial medicine. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to think about with regard to lipids and obviously diet stuff. I want to take it in a slightly different direction and talk about our next speaker, because this man I've been so impressed with since I first heard him lecture, and he actually made an appearance in my book, The Community Cure. So Dr. Chris Mote or Christopher Mote, I should say, is a physician in Colorado and is one of the smartest lecturers that I've had the opportunity to connect with. So he's been doing functional medicine in groups for a while, and actually doing lab review in groups, which I thought was really interesting, taking everyone that week who did lab reviews and putting them in groups. And he's been doing that for years. And he finds that to be not only super effective, but one of the most fun parts of his week. So this week on Thursday, we are going to be continuing our series, and I'm going to be doing a whole hour with Dr. Mote on his strategy for doing these virtual group lab review. And there's so many reasons to think this would be a great idea. One, doing lab review on computer is really good. Many of our clients in the Practice Accelerator use Loom. I don't know if you're familiar with Loom, but Loom is a software where you can actually record yourself and, bring up the screen and go over people's labs and talk, and then send them the video and put it in their patient portal. So a lot of doctors are doing that in our Practice Accelerator. He's taking it to the next level with this group where he's able to bring all the people who have taken a gut test that week in the clinic, bring them all into one session, go through the gut test to show you what all the numbers mean, not getting to any one specific lab review, but that information is enough for 90% of the people to feel good. And I think a lot of people feel like maybe an appointment for lab review is kind of a scam, right? It's not always easy to sell that. You're like, oh, I have to make another appointment just to get my labs reviewed. So just really think about, how could you make it easier? And groups and technology can certainly do that. So this Thursday, we're going to be getting into that a lot with Dr. Christopher Mote. So in the book, I talked about how he does his group visits there. And ultimately, we're going to have another talk from him right now, not necessarily about this group stuff. We're going to be talking about circadian rhythms and how circadian rhythms affect how your biology and how your mitochondria delivers energy. So again, I thought this was a really great conversation. We will do a few questions afterwards. So keep the questions coming in on #FunctionalForum. All right, let's get on to the next session. Here is Dr. Christopher Mote.
Let's start with circadian rhythms. So too many times when I hear circadian rhythms, people are talking about sleep. And that's only one of the circadian rhythms. Every cell in the body works on a 24-hour, just less than 24-hour rhythm. Every cell. In fact, they've removed cells, right? And they still do their functions on the same rhythmic pattern. So every cell runs on it. You can find these all over the internet if you're interested. This seems to get patients' attention when you show them this is the time when their body wants to shut down. This is the time when their body would be most alert. We put a slide like this in our group health class so patients understand that their body is on a schedule and they have suffered ill health effects when they take their body off of schedule, right? This helps them to see that. So this makes it simple. We talk about the big levers. I've heard that several times, right? We don't want to get caught in a trap where we see this nutrient deficit, so we replace that one and this one, and then we find that toxin and we do that. The big levers are that the body can detoxify more powerfully than we can do it for itself if we help it. And so the two primary cues in all of physiology are light and food. And it is both the timing intensity of the light and the timing and type of your food. And look at all the physiologic mechanisms we can influence. So we pull on the right lever and we can have sweeping impact in concert with the body. Okay? So some of the physiology that starts to come into play that we can recruit to work for our patient instead of shoving it aside and saying, we don't need this to be working because we're going to do all the magic ourselves. If we understand that cells of the body do not uniformly absorb nutrients 24 hours a day, it's not uniform. Your insulin levels, yours, mine, and our patients, are much higher in the morning and they drop towards the end of the day. The impact of that is that the cells will receive the nutrients from the meals earlier in the day and less so from the meals at night. Some of you who've studied nutrition understand that you don't want patients eating late at night because their blood sugar stays higher longer and they have more glycemic impact from a meal eaten at 8 o'clock at night than they do 8 o'clock in the morning. So most of the ways my patients do time-restricted eating wrong is they say, oh, missing breakfast is no big deal. I start eating at noon. But I'm on an 8-hour window and I go till 8 at night. And I said, that doesn't work. It rarely works. So we want patients to get their eating earlier in the day and stop earlier in the day because it's not uniform throughout 24 hours that the cells receive the nutrients. We also want patients to understand that when doctors talk about energy, they're really talking about fat. And your body will either store fat or burn it. But it doesn't appreciably do both at the same time. So it becomes a one-way street. And this helps patients to understand that while you're eating, you're not getting detoxification, fat burning, autophagy, tissue repair. You're not getting that. So you cannot eat the first hour you wake up and then go to the last hour before you go to bed, or there's not enough time in a day to do all that. And then you guys will get this. You've heard the term autophagy. My patients even come in speaking to me about autophagy. Dr. Mote, I need help to increase my autophagy because I want my brain to be healthy. Well, this is what you have to understand. We were talking about mitochondria from the beginning of this conference. And if you look it up, the tissues of our body that have the highest levels of mitochondria are the fat and the muscle. But that's misleading. It's 60% of our body weight. The fat and muscle is generally 60% of our body weight. But it only has 4.5% of our metabolism. It's because fat doesn't have needs for high energy. That's where it's stored. And muscles make up a lot of our body mass. So the fat and the muscle are 60% of our body weight, but only 4.5% of our metabolism. The liver and the brain make up only 23%. No, that's not right. I'm sorry, guys. Let me get it right for you. 60% is your fat and your muscle, and is only 23% of your metabolism. Your liver and your brain are only 4.5% of your body weight, but they have 36%. So I want you to compare the 60 and the 45 for body mass, and the 23 and the 36 for metabolism. But the point is, your brain and your liver are doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to metabolism. And so that's where most of the mitochondria are getting used, or are needed. So then when it comes to sleep, our bodies do amazing things when we sleep. And one of them that I realized as I dug into this material is that we leak if we don't sleep. So endothelial cells are more permeable. Your gut is more permeable. Your blood-brain barrier is more permeable when you don't sleep. And so when the patient comes in and they says, my ankles have been swelling, and you say, well, were you on a plane? No, no. Oh, you're not sleeping, are you? No. And so you're going to have more edema, you're going to have more leaky gut when patients don't sleep. And the converse of that is we get them sleeping, and then we can help with those. So here's the neuroanatomy I promised you. When we're talking about the stress response, and specifically circadian resiliency, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about the hypothalamus, and then those green nuclei are those within the hypothalamic nucleus. And maybe the most important ones, I think this is it. Oops, what did I do? There we go, got it back. The most important ones are the suprachiasmatic nucleus, where all of your circadian inputs, but primarily light, come through. And then you've got all the stresses that we talked about. That's your sympathetic nervous system. So that comes through the CNS. But they have to be integrated at the paraventricular nucleus. So I don't know what traffic's like here in Dallas, but in Denver we've got this road called C470, and it's been under construction for 3 years. And we can't stand it, but we all have to go down to one lane most of the time. And so when you have that kind of traffic in your brain, and it has to be organized and integrated at one spot, in this case the paraventricular nucleus, in order to get the proper marching orders moving through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. In fact, all of your stress response and its organization has to go through that nucleus. But the inputs are largely coming from 2 upstream nuclei, and here's why it's so important we get this right. You guys want a quick traffic lesson? Okay, can you play this for me? So it is a fascinating traffic lesson, and it took away most of my road rage. When people used to fly right on by me and then merge at the last minute, I'd get mad. But that's actually how this works. What you're seeing is blue cars that would represent your circadian rhythms of light and dark, sleep and awake, eating and fasting, and exercise. And the yellow cars at the bottom, that's your stresses. And right now, when there's low stress, traffic moves along very nicely. But as soon as you start adding more stress, this whole thing's going to get jammed up. So those stresses keep pounding on you, like inflammation from the diet, mental and emotional stresses from the job, nights of poor sleep, and you just see it doesn't stop. And everything goes slow. In order for this to start moving again, if we would space out our circadian rhythms, that is those blue cars, if they would line up, then you can absorb a lot more stress and keep things still moving. So, circadian rhythms are how you're going to help patients to deal with greater levels of stress, or to help them to integrate their stress so that their body can respond appropriately. Does that work? You guys get the analogy? Okay, thank you. All right, so you've heard this statistic many times. It's estimated that the majority of the office visits to a practitioner's office, especially primary care or functional medicine, maybe all of them, are from chronic stress, right? And I just told you, well, these are the symptoms, the conditions that are associated with it. So these are the labels that go with chronic stress. So if chronic stress is the root cause for nearly all chronic illness, and circadian rhythms provide resilience against chronic stress, understanding and resetting circadian rhythms is the first therapy we should be offering our patients. And since we've been doing this since April, we've had dramatic results, some of which patients have ended their plan after working with me for 2 years. They said, that was it, Dr. Mote, that was the icing on the cake. Others who have just started with this have had such early results, it's been really astounding. So if you get the circadian rhythms right out of the gate, everything else you try to do works that much better. Let me show you some examples. The way we would assess it to see if it's a problem is that at first visit, we'll ask patients, what time do you shut out the lights most night? And then what time do you wake? We want to know how much time are they spending in bed. And then what time do you eat or drink anything other than water? That starts your window. And then what time is the last time you eat or drink anything other than water? And I'm looking for a time that they say they do at least 6 days a week. So if somebody says, yeah, I have a snack once out of the week, that's not a habit to me, not in this instance. But if you're doing it 2 or more days a week, then it could be problematic. Then we'll ask them, what are you looking at the 2 hours before you go to bed? Invariably, it's a device. It's a phone, it's a laptop, it's a TV. And people, they know about blue, they just don't know what it does to them or how to really block it. They'll go by the blue blocking coating on their glasses, and that's never going to cut it for these purposes. We'll talk. But then, do you get outside each day? And do you wear your sunglasses? So in Colorado, we have 300 days of sunshine. Everybody's outside and getting sun. And most of us throw down our glasses right away, and that blocks 80 to 90% of the sun. So you can actually trick your brain into thinking it's dark even when you live in bright sunshine. So then do you exercise, and how often, and do you travel? You can get across time zones. You should probably throw one more in there, but I'm sure in your intake you're learning what do they do, because if you got a third shift worker, you heard Dr. Williams say this yesterday, that it's pointless to run a lot of testing if they're going to work third shift. I've struggled mightily with 2 types of patients in my practice, and there are those that fly, so pilots, and those that work third shift. And I never could figure out why these people just didn't seem to get better, why I couldn't get them sleeping, I couldn't do this. We tried the melatonin and the phosphatidylserine, it just never worked. So now, when they're on that, I have told people, you know, you're going to have to make this change, and then when you've done that, you come back and we'll get started if you still need me. It's that big a deal. Okay. So when you help the patients to set up circadian rhythms, think about it this way. That's a rhythm, right? That's a healthy rhythm. You got peaks and you got troughs. That's how most of our physiology was meant to be. Wide awake during the day, firmly asleep at night, right? Eat, don't eat. Not mixing the two. If it's flat and gray all the time and there's no rhythm, that's not good, right? So I show this to patients and they get it. And I said, so I want to help you set up the extremes of eating lavishly for a window of time, and then stopping all your eating so your body can really focus on other tasks. It's one or the other. I want you to be outdoors and get bright light to your eyes, and then I want you to completely block that which would stimulate your brain at night. And if you'll do those things, your body can start to get on a schedule again, and half of these symptoms that you and I are dealing with are going to improve or go away. And so patients come to a class and they hear about this and they get excited. They come home and they say, I bought my blue blocking glasses. I got outside yesterday. I sat on the porch. So here's the problem. Most of us can look outside and we see the outdoor light. We're up and around. It's the middle of the day. We're like, it's day. Cognitively, we know it's daytime. But the light in this room, which, by the way, there's this free app. It's awesome. It's called My Lux, L-U-X Recorder. So as I stand here on the stage, the intensity of the light is 20 lux. You need about 10,000 or more for 30 to 60 minutes a day to fully stimulate what are called melanopsin proteins in the back of the eye. There's only about 5,000 cells that make melanopsin, as opposed to hundreds of thousands that are cones and rods. So 5,000 cells that make melanopsin that tell your brain it's daylight. If you don't bathe them in bright light for 30 to 60 minutes a day, your brain doesn't see daylight. It sees gray. So cognitively we know it's daytime, our brain only sees gray. Okay? So we don't have the rhythm. If you want to help the patients with that, we actually need them to understand that these are some of the intensities of light that they can expect. And I got these after a month and a half walking around with this recorder. So I stood at the threshold of my office on a sunny day, and inside it was about 1,500, 2,500 lux. And as soon as I opened the door and I stood outside, glass windows, I moved through, now I'm at 18,000 lux, and I'm still in the shade. Right? So you don't have to be staring into the sun, or even in the sun. You need to be outdoors with your sunglasses off. So visors, hats, shade, hammocks. Those are great. Okay. And then at night, the problem is those same melanopsin proteins, it doesn't take much stimulation for your brain to again see gray and not dark. So you need them fully on and you need them fully off. And the only way you're going to do that is if you block the blue, indigo, and violet light in the spectrum. So any of these lights have blue light. You don't have to be looking at a device or a screen. Overhead lights, even the old-fashioned incandescent lights, have blue. And you must block them. So the first thing we'll say to patients is it dark outside? Because if it is, your lights need to be off in your house. So you would then have just the light, just the task lighting you need to do whatever you're going to do. But that's the way it used to be 100 years ago, right? Maybe more now. I don't remember how far back I have to go before there was just a fire and kerosene lamps, which were expensive. So when it's dark, we eat our dinner, we go to bed. We don't do that anymore. Think back to when you guys got your first device. How many years ago was that? It was not that long ago, relatively. And yet now this dominates our eyes. It dominates our eyes. Okay. So you need to block the blue light powerfully for at least 2 hours before you want to go to sleep, because it's not until you close your eyes and cut yourself off from the blue light, and then as much as a 2-hour delay before your sleep cycles actually begin in earnest. So your 7 hours in bed became 5 hours of sleep. All right, so these are what we want patients to do in terms of sleeping. We want them to block the blue light 2 hours before bed. We want them to not have a snack before bed. If you feel like you need a snack or your patient needs a snack in order to get to sleep, they say, I'm just too hungry, I can't go to sleep. They have trained their body, and you can retrain the body. But eating before you go to bed, again, encroaches on the sleep cycles because the body is still digesting and storing energy, and it's not moving into fat burning and detoxification and the sleep cycles. So no food 2 hours before bed. If you can't do it, then you move that bedtime snack closer and closer every week until you're at least 2 hours out from bedtime. Rooms that are cooler allow your body to cool by 1 full degree at its core, and that's our liver. And you probably need to drop in at least 5 degrees ambient temperature to accomplish that. And if there's squabbling amongst people who sleep together, then tell the one you want to sleep to get a chili pad. These are just kind of pricey, but they're these water-cooled pads you can put on one side of the bed and they'll sleep great. And then they won't fight over it anymore. And then apnea, oh my gosh. I hope you guys all have access for your patients to a home sleep study that's inexpensive. In Colorado, we've got a group all over the state that will drop one off, and patients can pay as little as $175 for a test that will check for both obstructive and central sleep apnea. And if there's any issues, then they go right over to an ENT office that specializes in that, and he takes it from there. So apnea is a big deal. I have moderate sleep apnea. I don't snore, other than falling asleep in church a little bit. I always just thought that was the pastor's message. No, I have moderate sleep apnea. I learned that through a home sleep test. Okay. So here's the other information we give to our patients on circadian rhythms. Here's what we've adopted as far as feeding and fasting in the office. We want our patients to eat this the same time every day, because you will sync up enzymes, acid levels, motility, absorption, and assimilation. That's pretty much covered all our digestion, right? All of those will start to sync up. It'll be like you've put your body on a schedule. And so I tell patients, you need to pick a time 6 days a week where you can eat the same time every day. And if you've got a radically different schedule from the weekday to the weekend, that might be part of the problem, but pick a time you can eat 6 days a week. And then nail it every day. And then how long you eat after that will be dependent on your needs. So we'll tell most patients 10 hours. You need to stop eating 10 hours after you started. If you want 14 hours of cleanup and repair and brain-derived neurotrophic factor and autophagy, if you want all of these wonderful functions, you got to stop. And so 10 hours is what the studies in the book I showed you, Dr. Panda, said is effective for reducing inflammation and these other functions. So most patients, we ask them to do 10 hours, and that's fairly attainable because that could look like 9 to 7, 10 to 8. I don't want my patients starting after 10 o'clock and going later than 8. If they want to start at 6 in the morning and end at 4 in the afternoon, that's their problem. That's fine. But generally speaking, I like 8 or 9 in the morning and stopping 10 hours later. And then if they really need to lose weight, then we will, for selected days, and you can work this out with them, it can be completely variable. You could do 1 day out of 7, a shorter window of 8 hours, or you could do 7 days in a row and really trim some of the waistline of your patient. But then when they go back to the 10 hours, they're not going to gain it back. In fact, if you start the same time every day and you start following some of these other circadian rhythms of light and dark, and your sleep starts to improve, and they all build on each other, you can go 12 hours, so maybe 8 in the morning till 8 at night, on occasions, right? When somebody's going to celebrate or it's Friday night and you want to go out, you can do that. 12 hours still gives your body 12 hours to fast and do all its functions. And so those patients that do that don't gain their weight back. So the 8 hours will trim it down, the 10 hours will still provide benefit, and 12 hours is not going to set you back. And we just tell our patients, you can decide which day, how late you want to go, but I want you to start the same time every day. It's very sustainable. And then, let me just say, I went back and forth on this, but caffeine counts. I hate to say it. It was the biggest challenge I faced personally because I would get my Starbucks on the way to the office at 6:30 most mornings, and I was ready to go, right? And then I realized I can't do that. If I have a eating window that starts at 8, I got to show up to the office. But guess what? My sleep started to pick up some steam. I started to wake up with greater energy. In fact, I was waking up at the time my alarm was normally going to go off, which was great. So caffeine counts. You're going to read things to the contrary, but we've not had any success with weight loss and really hadn't seen a lot of benefit from these circadian rhythms when we don't put coffee in the window. Okay. This confuses a lot of people. I tell them, I don't want you to eat once you've stopped. The window's closed, you don't eat. But then I start talking about blood sugar control. And again, this is about syncing up rhythms of the body. And when a patient says, I stopped eating and I had tremendous hunger pangs, I say, hang in there. 2 to 6 weeks later, you won't, because your body will start to fall in line with what you tell it you want. You have inadvertently trained your body to eat late. Now you're going to have to retrain it. And so this is part of that. People who say, well, I get low blood sugar if I don't eat every 3 to 4 hours. I say, well, that's going to change if you give your body the time at night to start doing its functions again. So keep at it. When you're eating in your window, you really need to eat lavishly, eat regularly, eat lots of food. I have not had to worry about caloric intake, though Dr. Saxena gave me a good idea, and there's probably a couple I should. But generally speaking, you can load up during that eating window, and then when you stop, your body handles all of that. So it takes a lot of stress off the diet. Exercise. Exercise is fantastic for what we've been talking about, mitochondrial function. I mean, you will raise the numbers of mitochondria, particularly in the muscle cells. You will improve neurotransmitters. And I agree with what was said earlier, that it's probably the thing we leave out the most frequently is that we forget to tell our patients, because when they come to us, they can't exercise all the time, right? I find that saunas and sweating is pseudo-exercise, and many of them pick up some of these same benefits. And then when they get to the point where they can actually move again, then we start getting them into exercise regularly. And for those of us who are practicing, if this has fallen off your self-care, this would be one of the first things to bring back if you want your brain chemistry, your mood, and your energy to rock again.
All right, Dr. Christopher Mote sharing some great stuff there on circadian rhythms and resilience. Lots of great information there. Again, if you want to hear more from Dr. Mote, we are going to be live on Thursday with a special webinar on his virtual group visits for lab review. Super innovative way of getting groups of people together who are doing the same labs and connecting them together. You know, it's interesting, you know, that we've talked before about this idea of anti-fragility and what is the difference between anti-fragility and resilience. You know, things that are resilient, like metal is resilient because the stress doesn't affect it. Things that are anti-fragile get better under that same stress. And I think that, you know, maybe the virtual group visit for lab review might be an example of anti-fragility in the functional medicine space, because the engagement, the ability for people to hear from each other, the ability to go through and see very clearly on the screen, I think are all things that add a tremendous amount of value. So I hope you've enjoyed the content this evening, and thank you so much for tuning in. As I mentioned at the beginning, next month we are going to be at the we're going to be doing a show which is going to be on the for, you know, it's going to be from the, we're going to be previewing the IFM annual conference. We're going to have some big names on the show next week. Thanks so much to the Lifestyle Matrix Resource Center for their continued support of the Functional Forum and helping us get footage. Obviously, you know, it's been great for us to be able to have all the footage from these conferences, to be able to share some of these best bits with you. Really appreciate all of your support here for the functional medicine community. And I hope that wherever you are getting together on some of the meetup groups we've seen on Zoom and WhatsApp groups emerging as community, you know, and digital community fills in for where physical community is currently not possible. So thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate being here as being part of the Functional Forum. We'll have another great episode on the June the 1st, the IFM pre-party. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.